Minister, the Irish government imposed the longest and most severe COVID restrictions in the EU. The government shut schools, businesses, building sites, healthcare and society down longer than any other country in the whole of the EU. And the scars of that shutdown are only becoming apparent in many ways. This particular question that I have is to find out of the total value of the wage subsidies that have been provided between 20 and 2021.
Thank you. The total cost of these schemes for the temporary wage subsidy scheme and the employment wage subsidy scheme was €10.26 billion, and they have played a role in protecting the jobs of up to 690,000 people in our country.
Deputy Tóibín.
I agree that the funds that have been provided by the government are absolutely necessary. There's no doubt and there's no question of that. If a government is going to shut a business down and prevent a business owner from being able to earn a living, that government has to provide an income to that business owner so that they can live. If a government is going to tell a worker that you can't work, you're not allowed to work, that government has a responsibility to provide an income for that worker to make sure that they have an income to pay for the costs to their families. I think the question here is the government had many choices to make, but the government took an outlier position, a position that no other country in Europe decided to take. And that necessitated 10 billion just on this aspect of expenditure. And they say it's estimated 40 billion euros in total of exchequer spending. Now, that's the second largest investment by a state on a crisis since the banking crisis.
Thank you, Deputy.
And what my concern is that there's so little investigation, so little analysis into the decisions made by the government in that period of time.
Sure.
Deputy, you are the person that opposed the use of vaccination certs for the reopening of the hospitality sector. That was you. So I say this to you again and again. You were against our economy being closed and our country being closed, but when we tried to reopen it safely, you were against that as well. You were against both. And in your reckoning and in your analysis of the duration of the lockdown that was in place in our country, which I do accept, Count Corla, was in place for many months, we in government accept the impact that it had on the economic and the mental health of those in a job and those who create jobs in our country. But I would have thought it would be appropriate in your evaluation of how we performed to have also noticed that our country and the measures that we had in place played a significant role in minimising the loss of life within our country, played a significant role in minimising the number of people who contracted that awful disease. So yes, we did have measures in place that require businesses to close for longer than was the case elsewhere, Count Corla, but it's also the case that the measures we put in place prevented even more of our citizens dying. And as I said, Count Corla, this deputy was against the closing down of our economy, against our efforts to safely reopen.
Carol McNeill and then Deputy Tóibín.
I want to welcome the support that you provided to businesses and their employees throughout the pandemic. I thought it was money incredibly well spent at a time when it was needed to keep businesses afloat. Could you maybe outline to the House the scale of engagement that you've had with business and what their response has been about the EUWSS? You certainly responded to calls from deputies like me to extend it, which businesses called for. They called for certainty, which you were able to provide to them by extending it and giving indications that you would do so, that you would wind it down gently. And there are so many sectors and businesses in my constituency who are utterly dependent on the EWSS. And as for the contribution to the national to the deficit generally, is it not the case that the VAT receipts have been higher than expected, that corporation tax has been higher than expected, and that we're on a trajectory to manage that much more effectively than we would have thought at the outset of all of this difficulty?
Deputy Peadar Tóibín.
Minister, we sought the use of antigen testing when your government poo-pooed the use of antigen testing and refused to use antigen testing. We knew, like many other countries, that antigen testing was actually a better way of stopping COVID entering the hospitality, that you could keep hospitality open with the use of antigen testing. We sought air filters in schools. We sought extra hospital capacity so people would be able to their lives would be protected without the same level of shutting down. We sought the proper management of nursing homes and hospitals, where the majority of people who died actually caught COVID in those 2 locations under the management of the government. Now, the party that sells itself as a party of fiscal responsibility is now the party that's created a national debt of €250 billion. Minister, you will have as your legacy a national debt of €250 billion. That's eye-watering figures, and it steals from future generations. It prevents hospitals from being built, it prevents doctors and nurses from being employed, it prevents schools from being built, it prevents society in the future functioning as it should. Your choices have actually robbed from future generations.
Councillor, Deputy Tóibín is the second deputy here this evening that's attempted to write my legacy. And I don't know what's provoked that here this evening. Deputy Tóibín, you are the deputy that voted against the legislation to safely reopen our country and our economy. You voted against it. You consistently voted against it, and you came here. I remember the debates in here vividly, where you voted against and argued against the use of certificates that allowed our hospitality sector to reopen. If you want to have a debate about my legacy, look at what's happening now with the number of employers that are opening up again. Look at how quickly the pandemic unemployment payment fell. Look at the way in which the viability of employers was affected during a moment of the greatest challenge for our country. And indeed, I published a debt report here today that also said that our level of higher debt has now stabilised, and there's the possibility indeed next year, Councillor, that our debt as a percentage of national income will be back to where we were before the pandemic. As for the engagement, Deputy McNeill, and thank you for raising it with me, constant engagement with businesses big and small across our country,
thank you, Minister.
not to mention with deputies like you in this House.
Deputy Tóibín, do you want to... No concluding remarks?
Listen, Minister, €250 billion is a phenomenally significant impact within society, and that money is owed as a state in large part because of the decisions that have been made. On another issue in relation to this, what efforts is the government making to recoup wage subsidies that would have been paid to firms who had profit, who paid dividends, etc., and supports that were given to firms that made profits and paid dividends in this period of time? Because again, all of this money comes out of the society's ability to deal with the major projects, major challenges that we have in the future, to pay for housing, for healthcare, for education in future. So what are the plans of the Minister in that regard? Thank
you. So I'm not quite sure. So out of the additional €32 billion of national debt, that I'm deeply aware of my responsibility for and understand the impact it could have in the future, I'm not sure what element of that you were against, Deputy Tóibín. Were you against the employment wage subsidy scheme? Were you against the pandemic unemployment payment? Were you against the additional money we put into our health services when the pandemic hit? What element of it were you against? What element would you have done differently? And as for the closure of our economy, which I fully accept had an effect on so many, yes, the level of closure that we had was higher than many, but so was the number of deaths that we were successful in preventing within our country, the loss of life, and the number of people that we were able to help not get this disease. On those indices, our country also fared well. Though, as I say it, I know there are thousands of people here in our country who don't have a loved one here with them this evening, and I'm very much aware of them when we have debates like this.
Thank you very much. Question 13 is